a very long time. Maybe you could date it almost to America's beginning in the 17th century. Maybe you could date it to the sweep across North America in the 19th century, Manifest Destiny. Or maybe you could date it to the post-World War II order when the United States assumed that it was the world leader. The so-called grand strategy, or the taken for granted strategy of America's elite, is that America should run the world. And to do that, the United States has created a worldwide network of military installations and CIA operations to try to run the world. Of course, it never achieved its goal because the U.S. is 4% of the world population, and much of the rest of the 96% doesn't want to be run by the U.S. But this aspiration is very deep in the American psyche. It comes with the power and the wealth of the United States, with a very militaristic vision of the world. If you don't like us, either get out of the way or we'll topple you or we'll invade you. And that has been American foreign policy for many decades. I think we should put aside the baby word of liberal in liberal order. There's nothing liberal about the United States. The United States is a militaristic regime that learned its militarism from the British Empire, which was the most militarized state of the 19th century, and the U.S. Learned at the knee of the British Empire. And the U.S. has been a militarized state pretty much nonstop since 1945. When the Soviet Union ended in 1991, the assumption of the U.S. Security elites or state elites is, well, we won. Now we are the most powerful country in the world in history. We are not the new Rome. We have surpassed Rome. No one can stop us. We can take down anyone. And that was the mindset of crazy people like Richard Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, and many others. And every president that came in was basically instructed by them. You are the leader of the most powerful machine of military force and coercion in world history. You are the center of the world financial system. You can turn on and off the financial spigots to any part of the world. You are at the node of the world information system. You can survey and intercept and disrupt information flows to any place in the world. You're at the center of the world energy system. You can turn on and off the taps, and if they don't like it, you can blow up the pipelines to do it. So this is the mindset. It is definitely the mindset of the incoming U.S. administration, even if the means might be different. There's no change in U.S. mindset. It's not exactly a joke that Donald Trump tweets every day that Canada is the 51st state. It's partly taunting, it's partly a game, but I'm sure he has in his mind, why don't we own all that territory? Why isn't the United States the owner of Greenland, in fact, as he says every day? Because the Chinese and the Russians are going to have more control over the northern sea route, so we better literally expand the map. To my mind, these people are, playing the game I used to play in my childhood, the game of Risk, which was a fun game where the idea was to have your piece on every part of the board. That's how you won. You took over the world. You'd roll the dice, and eventually you'd wear down through a war of attrition your neighbor if you had more pieces on the board. But they play this with real lives, and they play it with brutality, cynicism, coercion, subterfuge, And they play it till today. I'm sorry to say it. It's just this is really the way the world is.
But Jeff, some people are, including you, I think, have been talking about a phenomenon called de-dollarization, which we hear a lot about. So could you explain what de-dollar? I mean, I think we're familiar with it, but just for our audience, could you explain what de-dollarization is? And also, more importantly for this conversation, could you then say, well, what does that mean for U.S. power, U.S. hegemony, U.S. authority, even U.S. prosperity itself, insofar as there is still prosperity in the U.S.?
Great. And as I was running on and on, I forgot to mention the main point, which is that this vision of the U.S. is delusional. That's the bottom line. I forgot to mention that. I did say the U.S. is 4.1% of the world population. We're about 335 million out of some 8 billion people. It's not enough to run the world. The U.S. is very proud of its military prowess and its technology, but frankly, there are a lot of countries in the world that can blow up the U.S. and can blow up the world. So it isn't hegemony, it isn't unipolarity, it isn't being the sole superpower, but it is a lot of power. I mean, no other country in the world even remotely comes close to this military archipelago of bases around the world. 80 countries estimated, they don't make formal lists, so we have to guess, around 750 military bases. Britain still has a big network. Their nostalgia for empire is impressive, let me say, a little pathetic, but impressive. But the United States really stands on its own. Now, the state of affairs is that the U.S. has had several rude awakenings. It couldn't win, actually, back in Korea. There was an armistice that ended that conflict. It certainly didn't win in Vietnam. It didn't win in Afghanistan. It didn't, quote, win anywhere, even though it beat the shit out of these other places. It couldn't actually achieve its political goals or often its military goals even. So the idea of unipolarity is a kind of textbook idea of some second-rate thinkers in my mind, but it is a prevailing idea. Now, what are the bases of this? The core basis is supposed to be size of the economy. Unfortunately for the U.S., it probably, in best comparative terms, is now a smaller economy to China. So this is a matter of tremendous frustration to the American leaders and their self-proclaimed unipolarity. Another feature of this is the role of the dollar. Which means that when Lebanon and Saudi Arabia make a transaction together, make a trade, it's likely to be in U.S. dollars, actually, rather than in the local currency. Even when China trades in the Middle East or other places, up until recently, it has been in dollars. What does it mean in dollars? It means through U.S.-based banks or banks that deal in U.S. dollars, which mean that the banks hold dollar assets in the United States, either in counterpart banks or at the Federal Reserve. It also means that transactions pass through a U.S.-controlled electronic system. The best known part of which is so-called SWIFT system, which is an interbank notification system for transactions. This means that the U.S. has had a major ability to turn off financial transactions or to impose sanctions or to threaten countries that if they don't follow the U.S. line, their banks will be cut off from international commerce. In other words, countries doing business in other parts of the world that have nothing to do with the U.S. per se, but happen to settle the transactions through a U.S.-based banking system. this is what the role of the dollar has meant. Now, as a monetary economist, I can tell you there's no intrinsic reason why Thailand and Brazil should settle a trade in dollars. There is every other way to do that, but you need to create the institutional mechanisms for a non-dollar settlement system. It could be in Thai baht, it could be in Brazilian reales, it could be in Chinese renminbi, but you need institutions and technical mechanisms to make such a settlement and a policy framework to do it. The dollar has been convenient for everybody up until recently. It became less convenient when the US government started confiscating your dollars if you got out of line. And so if you were the government of Venezuela or Iran or North Korea or Afghanistan and most recently Russia, if the US Treasury didn't like you, well, your money's now our money. And the US froze $300 billion of financial balances that Russia held in dollar assets in a European institution called Euroclear, based in Belgium. The idea of the BRICS countries, which of course started with the acronym Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and then expanded to include Ethiopia, Egypt, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates, and now is expanding to another 9 countries in 2025, is that these are countries that don't want the U.S. to be able to turn on and off the spigot. So they are re-engineering their financial transactions so that their settlements are impervious to U.S. bluster. Of course, Donald Trump, even before he enters the presidency, has already waved his finger and threatened these countries if the BRICS dare to challenge the U.S. dollar dominance. We will show you. Well, let's see. I doubt it.
But also, Jeff, like in terms, I mean, the U.S. has been able to finance its debt, which is obviously in dollars, because of the clout of the dollar in world markets, right? So
this is another issue, which is
I mean, insofar as the U.S. power is tied to U.S. debt, which is 36 trillion or whatever.
There are two aspects in which this dollar role plays to the U.S. advantage. One is the capacity to meddle, the capacity to make one's own sanctions, the so-called unilateral coercive measures, meaning the U.S. says to another country, you don't trade with China or you don't trade with Russia. To make that effective has been the dominance of U.S.-based settlements. So that's the part that I was emphasizing earlier. There's another part, which is that if other countries are settling in your currency, they will want to hold your assets for their liquidity. In other words, they will want to hold dollar balances, dollar bank accounts. They may earn some interest on that, but rather low interest rates, because they need to hold those balances to be able to do their daily business. So in this sense, the U.S. has had very good financing terms for a long time, but kind of as a drunkard addict of running out your credit card, the United States has built up a tremendous debt because the terms of borrowing have been so easy. And now we're seeing that as other countries don't want to hold their balances, their liquid assets in dollars, they can hold them in renminbi, they can hold them in gold, they can hold them in crypto, they can hold them in other means. The terms of finance for the U.S. will worsen. Interest rates are rising, and that's not, in my view, only because of short-term cyclical factors, the inflation that arose in the context of the COVID disruptions and war. I think it is a deeper fact, which is that what Charles de Gaulle 60 years ago called America's exorbitant privilege is become less privileged as other countries are moving away from dollar reserves and dollar settlements. Now, economists debate, is this really happening? Will the BRICS get away with it? Is it empty bluster? Will Donald Trump's finger wagging be determinative and keep countries back? I can tell you, even within the BRICS, there are hesitations. Oh, maybe we shouldn't go this way. Maybe the U.S. will punish us. So there still is fear of the United States. You know it in the Middle East. I see the U.S. as, an arrogant, hubristic country that is a bit diluted in its power. But if you look around the Middle East, a lot of countries are terrified of the U.S. Or think we can't step out of line. They'll kill us, or they won't sell us the F-35s, or we won't get our spare parts for our planes, or they'll bring down our regime. So there is still a lot of question and debate about the trajectory of relative power. It's not so easy to quantify as measuring GDP, but my view is it's going to fade faster than people think. One other fact we should keep in mind, one other part of the debate: does the U.S. have a chokehold on the critical technologies? And there are several that are claimed to be chokeholds, the most important of which is advanced chips, very small 2 or 3 nanometer chips that are crucial for AI, for example. And it's claimed that the U.S. is going to keep the lead for years or decades. The second area is space technology, the capacity to put heavy payloads in space and to do other things in space. My own view, though I'm not, the final authority on any of these technologies, to be sure, is that claims of such technology chokeholds in the past have proved to be pretty ephemeral in practice. So I don't believe that the U.S. lead is so big, so decisive, that in the end it's going to be able to bat away the competition. I think the dollar will lose its preeminence. I think the BRICS will be a real counterweight. I think China will remain a very powerful, pure competitor, and even larger economy, and certainly a larger industrial economy than the United States. And so my view is geopolitics is really changing, though, of course, the uncertainties about that are real. Every week, I'm looking for it right now on my desk, but I don't see it. Every month, I get a copy of Foreign Affairs Magazine, which is the magazine of the Council on Foreign Relations. I view it as a kind of evidence of deep neurosis in the U.S., because every issue is a proclamation of America's continued and enduring primacy. Every article is a self-confirmation. We're still number one. We're always going to be number one. We're far ahead. China's collapsing. But I view this more like a Rorschach test or a psychological profile than I do a deep analysis of international relations.